so excited to be back here again at Stencil Girl Products, sharing a new stencil and mask collection. This is Vintage Gardens, and it was inspired by a local botanical garden where I sit and sketch quite often. And these flowers were all part of a collection of antebellum age flowers that they are trying to keep alive and thriving in local gardens here. And so that's where the inspiration came from. And you can read a lot more about each individual flower in the descriptions on Stencil Girl under the stencils. But I just wanted to give you a quick peek at them before we do a fun little project with them. So this is the stencil for the vintage coneflower, which also happens to be the state wildflower for Florida. And this is the vintage tick seed. Lots of cool little details there. And then this is the vintage camellia. Again, with some nice little art mark details. And here's a peek at each of those in the mask form, which has been used on the jelly plate. So here's the vintage coneflower mask, and the vintage camellia mask, and the vintage tick seed. And just really cool, but also a little bit different than the stencil when it's created on the plate that way. So I really love how those work together. And then this is a 9 by 12. This is the Leafy Garden. This has just been stenciled with artist sponge and acrylic paint. And I absolutely love the pop that you get with all of these lacy leaves. I use this in smaller books and pieces a lot just by pulling from the little corners and such. And then here it is also stenciled with watercolor and then doodled in between all of those little areas. And here is a peek at those same stencils I showed you a minute ago, but done with watercolor. So here's the vintage coneflower. And I just love how soft and ethereal those edges are. Here's the vintage camellia, and then the vintage tick seed. And it's just really interesting the different results you get depending on the different mediums you're using. You can even see it here with the watercolor and the acrylic. So lots of super cool stuff you can do with these. Here's a peek at what we're going to be creating. And these are just some fun little tags that you can have on hand. I love to use them in my journals. I use them for notes. So I'll add lines on the back and send it to someone, all sorts of things. And what is really neat about how you build these up is this is where you use the mask. So you can see this here in contrast to where we use the stencil here for the texture paste, and then play off of all of these with our own lines and marks. Here's a good example of the Leafy Garden stencil, and then I've just added some pencil marks there. Lots of cool texture through the vintage camellia stencil here with texture paste, but then adding lines and marks over it. The masks are great for allowing you to kind of trace and sketch around them with pens, so you get a more unique freehand styled sketch look, but without all the extra work of doing that. And again here, this would have been the mask, and this would have been the stencil. And stencil, stencil, and then just some free-handed lines. So lots of really cool things we can do, and we don't need a lot of supplies. So I am going to walk you through that step by step now. So to get started, I'm using my 6x6 jelly plate, and I have just a couple manila tags here. I think these might be like 3 maybe inches by 6 inches or so, just a standard size. And I've added a couple different colors to my plate. I've added this fresco finish chalk acrylic in taro milk tea. And then I've added the golden acrylic fluid green gold. And I am just going to use my brayer to first get a layer of color on the plate. I'm going to start with my lighter color, and I'm just going to brayer all the color out into a block. And then it's nice to have a piece of paper handy where you can wipe your brayer off unless you want your colors to mix. So then you can just clean the paint off your brayer, and then you can come back in with your second color and start creating another block. And I will eventually overlap these. I just like to get that initial color down first and then just do a really soft gradient to mix them. And then I'm not going to clean this green off just yet. Then I'm going to take 2 of my tags and just place them on the plate to pull up that color. One of them will probably have a slight edge that has no color. I'm okay with that because then I can use that to add doodles and marks. So once I have those in place, I take another sheet of paper and just lay that over the top and press that. That's just in case there's any paint on the edges of my plate where my tags might not overlap. It picks all of that up. And then I'm gonna pull up my tags. And you can see that pretty color there. And on this one as well. And I'll set those aside to dry. Leaving the plate like it is, I'm going to add a little acrylic Payne's Gray to the plate. And I'm actually going to use the brayer that has the green on it to move this around. I really like the color that I get when I mix these two. So I'm just going to cover the entire plate with the dark color. And I'm kind of thinning it out a little so it's nice and even. And I've mixed my green in with it. And then I'm going to lay some masks over this dark paint. So I am going to just get creative here and see if I can layer quite a few of these. And these are going to create that negative space for me in the tag. Okay, once I have all the masks down, I'm going to pick up my tag and I'm going to reposition it onto the plate. I've chosen to keep them in the same, on the same side, so I'm keeping the same or nearly same open white strip there for doodling. And then once that's on, this was the only one I didn't fit on there. I'm going to pull my paper over and brayer again. And just make sure all of the tag is down around all the edges of the masks. And you can kind of peek before you lift it up. So I'm going to pull the first tag, and you can see all the cool spaces that it left for me. And then I'm going to pull the second one. Oh yeah, see how cool? So it picked up and preserved that green and purple underneath. Now all of this is here. So what I could do is I could pull a few more tags and see what I get with those ghost prints. So I'm just going to lay another tag down. Depending on how much the paint dried or how much the mask moved when I pulled the tag up, our results are going to be really unexpected and definitely not perfect. But I like to play with ghost prints. I think they're super cool. So I'm just trying to pull up as much of that leftover paint as I can. And I did get a lot more of it. Also really cool. You can see a lot better where that green is mixed into that blue. Yeah, super duper cool. I love the ghost prints almost as much as the original print, if not more. So now I have my masks here. I would pull them off so that I could clean them right away. And what you're going to see are the impressions they left on the plate. So we're still not done. We're going to get even more images out of this. So I would go over and clean these now with a damp cloth, or run them under water and pat them dry. And once this plate is completely dry, I'll show you how we can pull those for 2 more tags. I think most of the paint is pretty dry on the plate, so I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of paint, and we'll know if it wasn't dry in areas because it will move and blend with this taro milk tea I'm adding again. So I'm just going to start moving the paint around the plate. Sorry, I have a squeaky brayer. I don't know why. It's always been squeaky. So I didn't get too much blending. So now I'm going to place the 2 tags on the plate. And put my sheet down. Really, really cool. They're even more ethereal looking than the ghost print. And you can see how much paint is still on my plate. Really, really cool. So look at where the little tag things popped in. I love that. Let's try that one more time. This time I'm just going to add some white paint to the plate. This is just a craft paint. And I'm going to move it around and grab my tags. And let's see if we can pull all of that extra paint up this time. So brayer it really well. Some paints are more stubborn than others. And you'll get several pulls, and they will get more and more ghost-like as you go. Yep. You can see here how very blurred. That's a good word. They've become very blurred. Okay, that one's not super bad. But we're getting lots of tags out of this one pull. So I'm going to do it one last time and see what we get. And this time I'll pull the whole print with a sheet of paper that I can cut up into little collage bits if I want to add anything extra to my tags. And I think most of it came up that time. And I have a pretty interesting, cool print. It looks like vintage wallpaper or something. So I was able to get a lot out of that one run. So in addition to this print, I also was able to get 4 of each tag in varying degrees of clarity and definition, which I'm okay with. Let me just do this so you can see them better. Because I'll use them in different ways, and they will each, even though they're definitely a series, will look very different from each other when they're done. So that's that set. And then this set, also really cool. This one is a little bit more blurred to begin with because it was a bigger negative space and it didn't have as much going on as these, but I am really loving these. So super cool. Now I'm just gonna work with one tag to create the project with you, but you're gonna have lots of them to work on off camera afterwards. Okay, so to begin with the tags, I'm gonna lay my plate back down, and I will work on two so that you can see how I address the edge here, but I like to put my tag back on the plate when I stencil because it keeps it from moving around. It's completely suctioned to the plate now, and I love it. And I also like doing this so that if I have a large stencil, like the Leafy Garden stencil, I can cover more ground at once. And as a series, they look really cool together because once I separate them, pieces of it are on both of the tags. For working on camera, I've chosen to use something dark so that you can really see it well. And I'm using a parchment colored craft paint and some sponges to apply the paint. So I am going to be using this Leafy Garden stencil, and I'm going to kind of play around with and see where I want to position it so that I get some of the print moving across the different sides of the tag. So I think I'm going to start with this one here. So I'm just going to add a little paint to my sponge and then take a lot of it back off so it's not too heavily saturated. And then having the tags on the plate really helps hold it down, but you also want to make sure your stencil is pretty secure. And I'm going to stencil through this, and I'm going to be going outside of those lines because I will be sort of covering some of my tag up with this color so that I have places to doodle and kind of reinvent those areas. So if I pull that up, you can see that it gave it a much more ethereal look than it did with just all of that dark paint. So I'm going to do that again over here with something that has some wider openings. I like this parchment color paint because it's not beige, not white. It almost has a little pink in it. So I'm going to bring this up a little on the edge. Yeah, I do like it coming off the corner like that. So I'm going to try to stay off of this wide piece here. And just take it all the way off the edge. And I think for this tag, I might just continue up the side and do the whole border. And I love how that looks. And again, any paint I have, I can use to kind of soften different areas of the tag. Along the edges there. Now, if I wanted to, I could come into this area with this same stencil, but I'm going to use a different color paint once I see which one I want. Here we go. And show you how it looks with adding the dark back in over the top. This is called a teal green, but I think it's like more of a forest green. And it's going to be a subtle change because of the dark background. So I'm going to use the same sponge that has a tiny bit of this parchment on it to tone it down a little. And then I'm just going to go right over this area that I added just paint and not stenciling yet. And you can see I am covering up some of the mask work that I did on the plate, but I like that because it kind of adds to all of those really interesting layers and makes it less one-dimensional. Really, really cool, right? I love that. So I'm going to come up here and do a little bit there. And then I am going to come off the edge and do some edge work there so that I have something to work with when I'm doodling. So that whole border where I had no paint or mask, I love that. That doesn't look like teal green, right? It's a really cool paint. It's by Chroma Josanja, and it's a matte flow acrylic, and the color teal green, but it is, I don't know, I think it's like a forest green. I really like it. I'm going to continue to make some marks with this color and the Leafy Garden Stencil all around those white spaces of the tag. It looks a lot different, right, than when we started. So I could stop there. I could keep going, but for time's sake, I will stop there, and we'll add some dimension now with our other stencils. So keep those on the jelly plate to keep them nice and secure. Now to add the texture paste, I do like the paint to be dry. If it isn't completely dry, the worst case scenario is it will tint your paste. It also looks super cool. But typically, if I'm going to tint my texture paste, I do it before I add it through the stencil. So either way works. When you're using your stencils and the texture paste, you do want to make sure to clean your stencils right away because it's gritty and you don't want that to build up. Especially in my stencils, there's lots of little delicate art mark openings. We don't want those to be sealed shut with texture paste. Today, I'm just using the Ranger Distress texture paste. I really like the actual texture of this. It's quite buttery and easy to use. I have an old key card. You can use a fresh one if you like super clean lines. As this one builds up, I like that it gets some dried texture paste along the edges, and so I get ridges and valleys in that paste as I scrape through the stencil, and I love that extra element. So you can decide that for yourself. And then I have the actual stencils here. So again, I'm just going to pull a little bit of the texture paste onto a corner of my key card. And let me see which one I'm going to use first. I really like how this tick seed one looks with all those little openings. So I might have that come across both stencils. So I'm going to lay it over the center line of that, or just off of that center line. And as I'm holding it down, I'm going to start at the top of the area I want to add the paste through and just pull it through. And any extra that lays on top of the stencil, I kind of scrape that back off and keep filling that. So where that isn't a perfectly clean read on those petals, I like all the little ridges that I'm getting. And it's better to start with a little less paste than you might need and add it in as you go so you don't end up with too much. So I kind of like how that looks. And I might come down here and add some through this one since the stencil is in place. And again, just add it through the opening and then pull it back off. Let's just go ahead and add it to a few on the bottom so we get something down here. And you don't have to use the entire piece or opening of the stencil. I'm a big fan of using stencils in part anyway, meaning I just like to use parts of them, not always the whole entire stencil. So I love that. And I think I'm going to leave it. I actually thought I dropped texture paste and picked up some of that parchment paint. So it is tinting my texture paste a little, just slightly. So that seems good to me. So I'm going to pull that up so I can clean that stencil right away. And you can get an idea for what that layer of texture will look like. And it's super cool because this one actually shifted ever so slightly somehow during the process, and it happens. And so I'm almost getting, I don't know if I can lift it up. I can't yet because it's stuck down, but I'll show you in a minute. It's almost giving me a drop shadow. These areas of texture are extremely subtle down here and blending in, but I like that. And so let's do a tiny bit more, but this time let's tint our paste. So I have some, this is whole bean, luminous rose acrylic paint. I'm just gonna put the tiniest bit down that I can. And then I'm gonna add a little bit of the texture paste to it. And just mix it up a little bit as best I can with a palette knife. And you can see now it's not quite as bright. And I'm going to actually take this cone flower stencil, just this little piece on the edge here. It's really hard to see on camera. And I'm gonna come off the edge here with it. So I'll just use the palette knife since that's what I already have loaded with the paint. And same thing, put it through the opening, scrape it back off. Yeah, I like it. Super cool. I love these little bud openings here too, so maybe I could do something with that. I'm actually gonna come down here and do a little bit more of the top of this cone flower. Again, I'm not being super careful to get every single opening because I like that more organic look to the layers. I thought that was going to be too bright, but I'm really liking how that looks. And then I am just going to put a little pop of it down here. I like them coming off the edge like that. This one you can see it's not filling in every single petal because I didn't have a lot left on my knife, but I like that. I think the tags turned out really beautiful as is. I love all the depth that I was able to create, and it's definitely like peeking into the window of a garden. If you wanted to add any marks, my favorite are the white gel pen. So I could come in here and say add some leaf work over the edge of a dark area, or I could come in with a pencil and kind of create some dimension to those leaves, maybe even adding in centers where it was cut off, that sort of thing. So that's definitely a process for each person to kind of hash out and see what they want to do there. So let's go ahead and add a few marks on our own, then we'll meet back here and review them and add some ribbon. So I've added some marks with white pen and black pen and pencil, and I would have been just as happy with it unedited, but I think this gives it a very artistic touch. And then I've brought in some different ribbons that I had in my stash that I dyed so that I could add a little piece to the top if I wanted. I think this is super fun, even if you're going to use them in your book, to give it a little touch of something that's coming off the top. So grab your ribbons and go ahead and add them to the top of your tags. And that way you can give them a finishing touch. And then, as I showed you on the back of many of these, I've added different ways to add notes with lines and just a little bit of watercolor. so that I could also send these in a package or add them to my journal that way. So lots of different things you can do with that. So I hope you had so much fun with this project. You can just keep adding layers to your tag until it's just as beautiful as you want it. I hope you had fun and that you enjoy swapping these with each other or adding them into your journal. I can't wait to see what you create, so be sure to tag me on Instagram at Rae Missigman and leave me a comment so I can share the love with you. Have fun, you guys, and happy creating.